There exists a test that your soul endures in absolute silence. No therapist witnesses it. No self-help book prepares you for it. Even the people who love you most cannot see it unfolding within you. You may have lived through years believing you were simply surviving difficult times, completely unaware that you were undergoing the most rigorous examination a human consciousness can ever face. This test happens in the spaces between your thoughts. It occurs in those 3 a.m. moments when you're alone with the weight of everything you've become. It manifests in the slow dissolution of who you thought you were and the painful birth of who you're actually meant to be. Carl Jung spent decades studying these invisible initiations that reshape certain souls completely. He observed that some individuals pass through what he termed the process of individuation by means of a doorway made entirely of suffering. A suffering that leaves no external scars, yet transforms everything within. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And he meant a very specific kind of pain, not the pain of a broken bone or a failed relationship, but the pain of meeting yourself completely without the protective illusions you've spent your lifetime constructing. Before we dive deeper, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it. The signs of this transformation are not obvious. They don't announce themselves with fanfare or celebration. They manifest in the most subtle of ways, recognizable only to those souls who have themselves walked this path. Perhaps you have already passed this test without knowing it. Perhaps the evidence is written in your energy, in the way you move through the world, in the quality of your presence that others sense but cannot name. These 7 signs we're about to explore are not achievements to be celebrated loudly, but quiet recognitions. An inner knowing that one's consciousness has been forever altered by its encounter with its deepest truth. Jung came to understand that certain souls undergo what can only be called a second psychological birth during their lifetime. This birth does not announce itself loudly. It happens in the spaces between words, in the silence after storms. It occurs in the moment when you realize that the person you thought you were fighting to become already lives quietly within you, waiting for you to stop performing and start being. Think of a tree that survives a lightning strike. The bolt tears through its center, burning and scarring. But something remarkable happens in the years that follow. The tree doesn't just heal, it grows stronger. Its wood becomes denser around the wound. Its roots dig deeper into the earth. It develops a new form of resilience, not the brittle strength that resists all pressure, but the flexible power that bends without breaking, that incorporates challenge into its very structure. This is what happens to the human psyche when it passes through its most painful test. You learn to metabolize difficulty in a way that transforms poison into medicine, chaos into clarity. What once would have destroyed you now becomes the very foundation of your strength. The essential question, then, is not whether you are worthy of this transformation. The question is whether you can recognize that it has already begun within you. Whether you can see the signs that you've already passed through the fire and emerged fundamentally changed. Let's explore these 7 signs together, not as a checklist of achievements, but as a map to help you recognize the sacred territory you've already crossed. Sign 1, Solitude. A sanctuary. The first sign reveals itself in your relationship with solitude. Where once aloneness felt like a punishment, it has now been transformed into a sanctuary. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the abandonment complex, that deep psychological wound, which drives us to scatter our energy in desperate searches for approval and connection. When you carry this wound unconsciously, being alone feels unbearable. The silence becomes deafening. You fill every empty moment with noise, with activity, with other people's presence, with anything that prevents you from sitting in the vast emptiness of your own company. But when this complex no longer governs your choices, something fundamental has shifted within you. Your energy ceases to disperse itself in seeking validation from without. Instead, it begins to consolidate, to gather itself into a centered presence that no longer leaks through the cracks of insecurity. A particular quality of stillness emerges in those who have passed through their soul's most demanding trial. It is not the stillness of withdrawal or depression. It's not the quiet of someone who has given up on life. Rather, it's the quietude that comes from no longer needing to convince anyone of your worth, including, and perhaps most importantly, yourself. You find yourself capable of being genuinely alone without that restless urge to fill the space with noise, activity, or other people's energy. This solitude becomes creative rather than destructive. It is in these quiet moments that you discover your best insights arise not from interaction with others, but from communion with the deeper parts of yourself that only emerge when the external world grows silent. Jung identified this capacity for meaningful solitude as a hallmark of what he called the individuated personality. A person who has successfully separated their sense of self from the collective, who no longer needs constant external validation to know they exist and matter. You may begin to notice how others flee from themselves through constant social engagement, endless entertainment, or relationships that serve as distractions rather than true connections. There is no judgment in this observation, only a quiet recognition of patterns you once followed yourself. You remember what it was like to fear your own company, to do anything to avoid sitting alone with your thoughts. Here's where something paradoxical occurs. The more comfortable you become with your own company, the more attractive you become to those seeking authentic connection. Your nervous system has recalibrated. Where once the unknown triggered automatic anxiety, you now approach mystery with what Jung called active imagination, the ability to engage with the unconscious, creatively rather than fearfully. You develop an appetite for the liminal spaces where transformation lives, those threshold moments, where one version of yourself dissolves and another emerges. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding these spaces. You've learned to inhabit them. And here's a crucial insight for those on the path of Carl Jung empath development. True empaths often struggle most with solitude because they're so accustomed to feeling and processing others' emotions that they've lost touch with their own. The transformation into sanctuary happens when the empath finally learns to distinguish between the energies they're absorbing from the world and the truth of their own inner landscape. Solitude becomes the sacred space where this discernment is cultivated. The quality of your alone time has fundamentally shifted. It's no longer something you endure, but something you protect. You guard your solitude the way you would guard any precious resource, because you've discovered that it's in these moments of aloneness that you access your deepest wisdom, your clearest intuition, your most authentic self. When someone invites you to something that would interrupt your chosen solitude, you feel no guilt in declining. You've learned that preserving your inner sanctuary isn't selfishness, it's self-preservation in the truest sense. You're preserving the self that knows itself, that trusts itself, that doesn't need constant external input to remain stable and centered. This doesn't mean you've become a hermit or that you no longer value human connection. In fact, your relationships have likely deepened. But they've changed from dependencies into choices. You choose connection from a place of fullness rather than need. You meet others as a whole person meeting another whole person, not as a fragment desperately seeking completion through someone else. Sign 2. Shadow integration and sacred fire. The second sign manifests in your relationship with your own shadow. Much of Jung's career was spent exploring shadow integration, the process by which we stop rejecting the darker aspects of our personality and begin to work with them consciously. This integration occurs within you in ways that would have been impossible before your trial. You develop a brutal honesty with yourself about your capacity for manipulation, your hunger for power, your ability to wound others when you feel threatened. Rather than terrifying you, this self-knowledge becomes a source of strength. Most people spend their entire lives running from these darker impulses. They repress them, deny them, project them onto others. They maintain the fiction that they are purely good, purely loving, purely light. But Jung understood that this denial doesn't make the shadow disappear. It only makes it more dangerous, forcing it to operate from the unconscious, where it can wreak havoc without your awareness. You've done something different. You've turned to face the parts of yourself you once found most shameful. You've looked directly at your capacity for selfishness, jealousy, rage, and cruelty. And in that looking, something miraculous has occurred. These impulses have lost their power to control you from the shadows. You recognize these impulses not as character flaws to be eliminated, but as primal energies to be understood and channeled consciously. This is the essence of shadow work, not destroying these parts of yourself, but integrating them, bringing them into consciousness where they can serve your evolution rather than sabotage it. Your anger has transformed. Once, it either exploded destructively, damaging relationships and leaving wreckage in its wake, or it festered in repression, turning inward as depression and self-loathing. Now it has become what can only be called a sacred fire. It burns now only what needs to be destroyed in your life relationships that no longer serve your growth patterns, that keep you small agreements you made with yourself and others when you knew far less about your own worth. This anger serves your evolution rather than sabotaging it. It has become a tool of discernment, a force that protects your boundaries and clears space for what truly matters. When you feel it rising now, you don't fear it. You listen to what it's telling you about where your life has become misaligned with your truth. There is an energetic integrity that others sense in you now, even when you remain silent. People feel your authenticity because you have made peace with your own contradictions. You no longer try to resolve the paradoxes within yourself, the fact that you can be both generous and selfish, both loving and capable of coldness, both confident and insecure. You've learned to hold these opposites consciously, allowing them to create what Jung identified as essential for psychological growth: dynamic tension. It's this tension between opposites that generates psychic energy, that drives development, that makes you feel vitally alive, rather than comfortably numb. You no longer collapse this tension by choosing one side and repressing the other. You hold both, and in that holding, you become more fully human. The way you process emotional intensity has fundamentally shifted. Where once overwhelming feelings could destabilize you for days or weeks, you now have a container strong enough to hold the full spectrum of human experience. Your emotional range has actually expanded. You feel more deeply than you did before. But your relationship to these feelings has become one of conscious partnership rather than unconscious possession. You can feel rage without becoming rage. You can experience despair without being consumed by despair. You can touch into deep grief without losing yourself in it. This is the hallmark of shadow integration. The emotions move through you. They inform you, they teach you, but they no longer own you. And here's what's remarkable. Others can feel this shift in you. There's a groundedness that comes from genuine self-possession. You move through space as someone who has met their own darkness and survived. There's nothing performative about this. You're not trying to project confidence or strength. You simply are confident and strong in a way that comes from knowing exactly what you're capable of, both the light and the shadow, and choosing consciously how to direct that power. People who are still running from their shadows often feel uncomfortable around you now. Your presence reminds them of what they're avoiding. But those who are ready for their own integration are drawn to you like moths to flame. They sense that you've walked a path they're being called to walk, and something in them recognizes the possibility you represent. Sign 3. Immunity to projection. The third sign manifests as a remarkable immunity to projection. Projection is the unconscious process by which people deposit their unprocessed psychological material onto others. They make you responsible for emotions, reactions, and insights that actually belong to them. Before your transformation, you were likely highly susceptible to other people's projections. When someone accused you of being angry, you felt angry. When someone treated you like you were incompetent, you felt incompetent. When someone projected their fear onto you, you absorbed it and made it your own. You had weak boundaries between where you ended and others began. But now, you've developed an almost scientific ability to observe when someone is making you responsible for emotions, reactions, or insights that belong to them. This recognition comes without anger or a sense of superiority. It is simply data about how the human psyche operates when it lacks self-awareness. Drama that once pulled you in like a gravitational force now feels foreign to your system. You watch triangulations, manipulations, and emotional games with the detached interest of a researcher studying natural phenomena. You can see the patterns playing out. You can understand why people are behaving the way they are. But you don't feel compelled to enter the drama and play a role in it. Your compassion has evolved from the codependent variety that sacrifices itself to rescue others into what can only be called mature compassion, and the kind that offers presence without losing itself in another's suffering. You can sit with someone in their pain without making it your pain. You can witness their struggle without feeling responsible for fixing it. This relates to what Jung termed the transcendent function, and the psychological capacity to position oneself above dualistic conflicts and perceive the larger patterns at work. This function has activated within you. When others bring you their crisis, you no longer experience the automatic anxiety that once made their emergencies your emergencies. Instead, there is a serene recognition of the limits of your responsibility and the wisdom of allowing others to meet their own challenges. You understand that jumping in to rescue someone often robs them of the very struggle they need for their own growth. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is step back and trust others to find their own strength. You find yourself naturally stepping back from situations where your energy is being used to maintain someone else's emotional equilibrium. This stepping back is not cruelty, but clarity about the difference between supporting someone's growth and enabling their avoidance of necessary lessons. People may interpret your new boundaries as coldness. Some will accuse you of being distant, uncaring, or selfish, but you recognize these accusations for what they are: projections of their discomfort with your refusal to continue playing roles that no longer serve you or them. You're no longer willing to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. This is particularly significant for those on the Carl Jung empath journey. Traditional empaths often pride themselves on their ability to feel and absorb others' emotions, seeing it as a gift or a calling. But mature empaths, those who have passed through their soul's test, understand that indiscriminate absorption of others' energy is not true empathy. It's enmeshment. True empathy involves feeling with someone while maintaining clear boundaries about where they end and you begin. The empaths who develop projection immunity discover they can be even more helpful to others, not by absorbing and carrying their pain, but by holding a clear, grounded presence that reflects back to people their own capacity for healing. You become a mirror rather than a sponge. Your relationship with time has also undergone a fundamental reorientation. You no longer experience time as a scarce resource to be hoarded or an enemy to be defeated, but as a dimension of existence to be inhabited fully. You're not constantly rushing toward some future moment when life will finally begin. You're here now, present to what is, rather than obsessed with what should be. This presence makes you remarkably difficult to manipulate. Manipulation relies on either hooking into past wounds or dangling future promises. But you're anchored in the present moment, processing what's actually happening rather than the stories people are trying to tell you about what's happening. You've learned to trust your direct experience over others' interpretations of your experience. When someone tells you you're too sensitive or you're overreacting, you check in with your own felt sense of truth rather than automatically doubting yourself. You've learned that gaslighting only works when you're disconnected from your own inner knowing. Sign 4. Awakened intuition and synchronicity. The fourth sign emerges in your intuitive capacity, which blossoms into a fully activated function. Where once you relied primarily on logical analysis to make decisions and understand situations, you now consult an inner knowing that connects you to information beyond the reach of rational thought. This is one of the most profound changes that occurs after passing through the soul's test. Your rational mind is still functional, perhaps more functional than ever, but it's no longer your only or even primary tool for navigating reality. You've developed access to a deeper intelligence, one that Jung associated with the collective unconscious and the self-archetype. The self in Jungian psychology is the archetype of wholeness. It's the organizing principle of the entire psyche, the inner center, that guides individuation. When you begin to hear the voice of the self clearly, you can distinguish it from the urgent demands of the wounded ego, from the should voices of internalized authority figures, from the fear-based chatter of the survival brain. The self speaks quietly. It doesn't argue or justify. It simply knows. And when you've learned to listen to it, decision-making becomes remarkably simpler. Not easier necessarily, but simpler. You know what you know, even when you can't explain how you know it. Synchronicities begin to flow through your life with increasing frequency. These are the meaningful coincidences that Jung spent years studying, events that have no causal connection but are connected by meaning. You think of someone and they call. You need information and the perfect book falls off the shelf. You're struggling with a question and you overhear a conversation that contains exactly the insight you needed. These synchronicities create a sense that events align according to an intelligence far greater than your conscious planning. You begin to trust this intelligence. You learn to follow the breadcrumbs, to pay attention to what catches your attention, to recognize that nothing is random and everything is information. Your ability to read the invisible layers of people and situations expands exponentially. You perceive motivations, patterns, and likely outcomes that remain hidden to others. This isn't through cynicism or paranoia. It's through a refined sensitivity to the energetic information flowing beneath surface appearances. When someone speaks, you hear not just their words, but the emotion beneath the words, so the need beneath the emotion, the wound beneath the need. You see the whole person, not just the persona they're presenting. This can be overwhelming at times, but you've learned to hold this information lightly, to use it for understanding rather than judgment. Decision-making no longer requires extensive pros and cons lists or endless analysis. You've developed a direct line to what Jung called your inner counsel, a wisdom that has access to knowledge accumulated not just through your personal experience, but through the collective unconscious, through ancestral memory, through sources you cannot rationally explain, but have learned to trust completely. This doesn't mean you've become impulsive or reckless. Your decisions are often more careful than before. But the careful consideration happens on a different level. You check in with your body, with your dreams, with your felt sense of rightness. You've learned that the body knows things the mind hasn't caught up to yet. A quality of listening develops within you that goes far beyond hearing words. You attune to the spaces between sentences, the emotions hiding beneath explanations, the soul speaking through the persona. This listening is not analysis, but reception. It's not judgment, but witnessing of the full spectrum of human complexity. People often remark that they feel deeply heard by you even when you've said very little. That's because you're not waiting for your turn to talk. You're not formulating responses while they speak. You're actually present, actually receiving what's being offered. This quality of presence is rare and precious in a world of constant distraction. You've also developed the ability to be alone with questions without needing immediate answers. Most people find uncertainty unbearable. They need to know, to understand, to explain. But you've learned to sit with mystery, to trust that understanding will emerge in its own time. This patience with the unknown is itself a form of wisdom. The rational mind wants to map everything, to categorize and control. But you've discovered that some of life's most important knowledge comes through intuition, through dream, through the body's wisdom, through the whispers of the unconscious. You've learned to honor these ways of knowing alongside reason, creating a much richer and more complete understanding of reality. Sign 5. Embracing death-rebirth cycles. The fifth sign reveals itself in your embrace of the natural cyclical nature of psychological development. You've integrated what Jung called the death-rebirth archetype so completely that you no longer fear the periods when your life seems to dissolve. These times of apparent ending have become familiar preludes to expansion and renewal. You understand now that psychological death is not the end of growth, but the necessary ground for it. The old self must die for the new self to emerge. The outgrown identity must be shed like a snake's skin. What once served you must be released to make room for what will serve you next. Your relationship with uncertainty has transformed from avoidance into active engagement. Where once you needed guaranteed outcomes before you would take action, you now recognize that the most meaningful growth occurs in the space between decision and result. In the willingness to act from inner alignment, even when you cannot see the path ahead. This doesn't mean you're comfortable with uncertainty in the sense of feeling no discomfort, but you've developed a tolerance for the discomfort. You can hold the tension of not knowing without collapsing it prematurely. You trust that clarity will emerge through action rather than waiting for clarity before acting. An energetic economy begins to work within you, protecting your vital resources. Your energy is no longer scattered across dozens of draining commitments made from guilt, obligation, or the need to prove yourself. Instead, you've learned to invest your life force strategically, like a wise gardener who knows which plants deserve water and which need to be pulled up to make room for new growth. You understand that growth moves in spirals, not straight lines. You revisit the same themes at deeper levels. You face similar challenges with new tools. This brings tremendous patience with your own process. You no longer beat yourself up for still dealing with this issue. You recognize that each spiral takes you deeper into understanding that there's always another layer to integrate. This is crucial for personal development through a Jungian lens. The modern self-help industry often sells the fantasy of permanent transformation, one breakthrough, and you're fixed forever. But Jung understood that individuation is a lifelong process. You're never done. There's always deeper to go, always new aspects of the self to integrate, always another death-rebirth cycle to navigate. Your creativity has undergone a fundamental shift from external achievement to internal expression. You no longer create to prove your worth or to gain recognition. You create because creation has become a form of communion with the life force moving through you, the art, the writing, the work. These are channels for something greater than your individual ego to express itself through you. There's a quality of surrender in your creative process now. You're no longer trying to force outcomes or control how your work is received. You make the offering and release it. You trust that what needs to reach people will reach them. Your job is simply to remain open to the creative impulse and give it form. You've also developed a profound acceptance of the seasons of your soul. Just as nature moves through cycles of growth and dormancy, expansion and contraction, so does the psyche. There are times when you're meant to be active, productive, outwardly focused. And there are times when you're meant to rest, to turn inward, to allow things to compost in the dark. Winter is no longer failure. it's preparation for spring. The fallow periods are not signs that something is wrong, but natural pauses that allow for integration and renewal. You trust the cycle now. You don't panic when things seem to be dying. You understand that death in the psychological realm is always followed by rebirth. This acceptance of cycles has freed you from the tyranny of constant progress. You're no longer measuring yourself against linear metrics of success. You're not asking, "Am I further along than I was yesterday?" But rather, "Am I more deeply myself than I was yesterday?" These are very different questions, and they lead to very different lives. You've learned to recognize the signs that a death-rebirth cycle is beginning. That restlessness, that sense that your current life no longer fits that strange combination of anxiety and excitement. You know these feelings now. You don't resist them. You prepare yourself knowing that you're about to shed an old skin and emerge more authentically yourself. And perhaps most importantly, you've stopped trying to rush the process. You trust the timing of your own transformation. You know that you can't force a caterpillar to become a butterfly faster. The dissolution has its own pace. The reformation takes as long as it takes. Your job is not to control the process, but to cooperate with it. Sign 6, inner authority over external validation. The 6th sign emerges in your relationship with external validation. Jung and his contemporary Alfred Adler both wrote about the inferiority complex, those deep wounds that drive us to constantly compare ourselves to others and prove our worth through achievement, appearance, or performance. This complex has dissolved within you so completely that the impulse to measure your worth against external standards feels foreign. You've developed what Jung called inner authority, a psychological structure that validates your experiences independently of social consensus. Your sense of self no longer requires external confirmation to remain stable. Your self-worth no longer fluctuates wildly with the changing tides of opinion. Criticism and praise register with similar neutrality, processed as information rather than verdicts on your fundamental value as a human being. When someone criticizes you, you can evaluate whether the feedback contains useful information without experiencing it as an attack on your identity. When someone praises you, you can receive it graciously without inflating or becoming dependent on their approval. This shift frees enormous energy previously consumed in managing your image. You're no longer constantly calculating how you're being perceived, adjusting your behavior to maintain others' good opinion, or exhausting yourself trying to be all things to all people. You've accepted that some people will like you and some won't, and that this says more about them and their values than it does about your inherent worth. Your authenticity has become non-negotiable. You naturally choose rejection for who you truly are, over acceptance for a performance of who you think others want you to be. This doesn't mean you're deliberately provocative, or that you've stopped being considerate of others' feelings. It simply means you're no longer willing to betray yourself to maintain false harmony. The people-pleasing pattern has dissolved. Where once you would contort yourself into impossible shapes trying to keep everyone happy, you now understand that your job is not to manage other people's emotions or meet their unspoken expectations. Your job is to show up as honestly as you can and let others respond however they choose. This is particularly transformative for those on the path of Carl Jung, empath, and personal development. Empaths often struggle intensely with external validation because their gift for feeling others' emotions makes them hypersensitive to disapproval. They can feel when someone is disappointed in them, angry at them, or withdrawing affection. This sensitivity can become a prison where they're constantly adjusting themselves to maintain emotional harmony in their environment. But empaths who develop true inner authority recognize that feeling someone's disappointment doesn't mean you're responsible for fixing it. You can be aware of others' emotional responses without making those responses the arbiter of your choices. This is one of the most liberating realizations possible for a sensitive soul, that you can care about others without being controlled by their feelings about you. the way you inhabit your physical body has shifted as well. There's a groundedness that comes from genuine self-possession. You move through space as someone who belongs to themselves first, who answers to their own internal sense of rightness before external shoulds. People can feel this quality in you. It's not arrogance or aggression. It's simply an unshakable knowing of your own worth that doesn't require defense or justification. You've stopped arguing for your limitations, where once you might have said, "I'm just not good at that," or "That's not who I am." You now recognize these statements as identity defenses rather than truths. You've become more interested in discovering what you're capable of than protecting a fixed story about who you are. This doesn't mean you lack humility. In fact, your humility has deepened. But it's a different kind of humility, not the self-negating kind that stems from insecurity, but the realistic kind that comes from genuinely knowing both your strengths and limitations. You can acknowledge what you don't know without feeling diminished. You can ask for help without feeling weak. The comparison trap has lost its grip on you. When you see someone excelling in an area you struggle with, you can appreciate their gifts without experiencing it as a commentary on your inadequacy. When you see someone struggling with something you find easy, you don't feel superior. You've stopped relating to others through the lens of better than or less than. You can simply witness the infinite diversity of human gifts without making it personal. Your choices are guided now by internal rightness rather than external approval. When faced with a decision, you check in with yourself first. Does this align with my values? Does this serve my growth? Does this feel true to who I am becoming? The opinions of others become just one data point among many, not the primary determinant of your path. This inner authority extends to your relationship with expertise and credentials. You can respect someone's knowledge or experience without automatically deferring to them about your own life. You've learned to take what resonates and leave the rest even from recognized authorities. You trust your own discernment about what's true for you. Sign 7. Energetic sovereignty. The seventh sign manifests as a refined discrimination about how you invest your energy. The process of individuation culminates in what can only be called energetic sovereignty, the ability to protect your essence without aggression simply through conscious choice. Your presence has become more selective, more precious. You no longer distribute yourself indiscriminately, giving your time and attention to anyone who asks for it. This is not elitism or superiority. It's wisdom about the sacred nature of your own life force. You've recognized that your energy is not an unlimited resource to be spent casually, but a precious gift to be offered consciously. A natural authority emanates from you now. Not power over others, which always carries a hint of insecurity and the need to dominate, but power over yourself, which is the true hallmark of psychological maturity. You govern your own responses. You direct your own attention. You choose your own investments. This self-governance creates a field of presence that others can feel. The guilt that once accompanied setting limits has dissolved completely. You protect your energy with the naturalness of protecting any valuable resource. When you say no, you say it cleanly without elaborate justifications or apologies. When you say yes, you give fully without resentment or depletion. This clarity in your giving and withholding creates clean energy exchanges. You've learned to recognize those individuals' projects and relationships that drain your vitality without offering anything of value in return. These recognition is not judgmental. You don't condemn these people or situations as bad. You simply notice the energetic exchange and make conscious choices about where you invest yourself. There are relationships that feed you and relationships that feed on you. You've become skilled at distinguishing between them. The relationships that feed you are characterized by reciprocity, by mutual growth, by an energetic balance where both people give and receive. The relationships that feed on you are characterized by endless taking, by one-way energy flow, by your constant giving while receiving little in return. You've stopped trying to fix or save people who aren't asking to be met. You've recognized that your desire to help others often masks your own avoidance of your own growth work. It's easier to focus on someone else's problems than face your own. But you've moved beyond this displacement. You take care of your own development first, and from that overflow, you can genuinely help others when your help is wanted and welcomed. Your relationship with suffering itself has undergone a fundamental transformation. Where once pain was something to be avoided at all costs, it has become a teacher whose lessons you receive with gratitude. This doesn't mean you seek suffering or romanticize it. It means you no longer waste energy resisting unavoidable challenges. You meet them, you learn from them, and you allow them to sculpt you into something more than you were before. There's a particular quality that follows you now, a stillness that has nothing to do with the absence of movement and everything to do with the presence of deep centeredness. This stillness is magnetic. It attracts those who are searching for something they cannot name but recognize immediately when they encounter it in you. You've become a living example of what Jung called the individuated soul, a person who has successfully completed the psychological work of becoming who they actually are. Your presence alone now teaches what words once tried to explain. People don't need to hear about your journey to sense that you've taken one. They feel it in the quality of your attention, in the steadiness of your energy, in the way you remain calm in situations that would have destabilized you before. You've stopped performing transformation and started living it. The difference is palpable. Performance always carries a hint of trying, of effort to convince others and yourself. But authentic transformation simply is. You're not trying to be peaceful, you are peaceful. You're not trying to be authentic, you are authentic. The trying has dissolved into being. This energetic sovereignty manifests practically in countless small ways. You leave social gatherings when you're ready, not when others expect you to. You speak when you have something to say, not to fill silence. You share your gifts where they're valued, not where they're demanded. You rest when you need rest work, when you have energy for work and trust that your rhythm serves you better than any externally imposed schedule. The question of whether you're doing enough has dissolved. You're no longer measuring yourself against productive standards set by a culture that values output over being. You've found your own pace, your own rhythm, and you trust it completely. Some days you move mountains. Some days you simply breathe. Both are valuable. Both are enough. What has occurred within you is not recovery, but fundamental reorganization. This is not about bouncing back to who you were before the trial. It's about becoming someone entirely new, someone who couldn't have existed without passing through what you passed through. You have achieved what Jung called psychological independence, freedom from your early programming, from the internalized voices of authority figures, from the collective conditioning that once governed your choices unconsciously. You still carry the past with you, but you're no longer controlled by it. You've metabolized your history into wisdom. There's a sense of completion that has nothing to do with external achievements and everything to do with an internal reconciliation. You're no longer at war with yourself. The parts of you that were fragmented have come together. The aspects you disowned have been reclaimed. The shadow has been integrated. The persona has become more flexible. The self has emerged as the organizing center of your psyche. You no longer need to recover from your past because you've learned to create from your present moment. This is a crucial distinction. Recovery implies returning to a previous state. But you're not going back. You're moving forward into territory you've never inhabited before. The person you thought you should become has been revealed as a limitation compared to the unique being you actually are. All those years spent trying to fit yourself into someone else's template for success, happiness, or spiritual advancement, you can see now how that was a form of self-betrayal. The real you is infinitely more interesting, more complex, more authentic than any idealized version you were chasing. Your journey continues, but a crucial phase has been completed. You have passed through the soul's most demanding examination. You've emerged not unscathed. The scars are there etched into your psyche, but integrated. You're not unchanged. You're fundamentally different. Yet paradoxically, you're more essentially yourself than you've ever been. The test revealed your true nature. It burned away everything that wasn't actually you, the false identities, the protective personas, the borrowed beliefs. What remains is essence. What remains is truth. What remains is the person you were always meant to become once all the conditioning was stripped away. The secret that Jung spent his lifetime learning has become your lived reality. The soul does not grow despite suffering, but through a conscious and transformative relationship with it. Your pain has become your teacher. Your wounds have become your wisdom. You carry the quiet dignity of someone who has met themselves completely and found not perfection, but wholeness. And wholeness, Jung understood, is the real goal. Not the eradication of flaws, not the achievement of some impossible ideal, but the integration of all aspects of your self-light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, clarity and confusion into a coherent whole that can move through life with authenticity and purpose. If you recognize yourself in these signs, know that you have passed through an initiation that most will never understand. You've walked through the fire and emerged transformed. But your transformation serves a purpose beyond your individual evolution. You have become a template of possibility for others. This doesn't mean you need to become a teacher or guru. You don't need to stand on a stage or write a book or build a following. Your very existence, the way you move through the world, the quality of your presence, this alone creates a field that touches others. People who are ready for their own transformation will be drawn to you. They won't necessarily know why. They might not even like you at first. But something in them recognizes that you've walked a path they're being called to walk. Your presence activates in them the possibility of their own transformation. This is how consciousness evolves on this planet, not through mass movements or grand revolutions, but through individual souls doing their deep work one at a time. And in doing so, creating ripples that touch everyone around them. Jung called this process individuation, and he saw it as the great task of the second half of life. But for some souls, individuation happens earlier. Sometimes life delivers its most demanding tests in youth, forcing an early reckoning with questions most people avoid until their later years. If you've undergone your soul's test already, you're ahead of the collective developmental curve. You've done work at 20 or 30 that many people won't do until 60, if ever. This is not something to be proud of in an ego sense. You didn't choose this timing. Life chose it for you. But you can recognize it as the profound responsibility it is. You've been given something precious, hard-won wisdom, integrated consciousness, refined perception. These gifts are meant to be lived, to be embodied, to be offered to the world in whatever form feels authentic to you. The journey of conscious evolution doesn't end with your individual transformation. In fact, in many ways, it only begins there. Once you've done sufficient work on yourself, you become capable of participating in collective transformation. Your clear presence contributes to the field of human consciousness. Your integrated shadow means you're no longer unconsciously projecting it onto others. Your inner authority means you're no longer looking to external power structures to tell you who you are. Every person who individuates makes it slightly easier for the next person to individuate. You're clearing a path that others will follow. You're proving that transformation is possible, that the soul can survive its darkest tests, that consciousness can reorganize itself into something more whole and authentic. This is the spiritual significance of your journey. It was never just about you. Your suffering served a collective purpose. Your transformation creates reverberations in the collective unconscious that will touch people you'll never meet in ways you'll never know. This is how the species evolves, slowly, painfully, courageously, one transformed soul at a time. So here we are at the end of our exploration together. But of course, it's not really an ending. For those of you who recognized yourselves in these 7 signs, this is a beginning. A recognition of what has already occurred within you, and an invitation to live from that transformed place with full consciousness. If you're still in the midst of your soul's test, take heart. The fact that you're watching this, that these ideas resonate with you, suggests that transformation is already underway. You don't need to force it or rush it. Trust the process. Trust the timing. Trust that your psyche knows what it's doing, even when your conscious mind is confused and frightened. The test is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself. It's about stripping away everything that isn't actually you until what remains is essence, is truth, is the person you were always meant to be once all the conditioning was cleared away. I want to invite you into conversation. Which of these 7 signs resonated most deeply with your experience? What test has your soul endured in silence? How has your pain become your teacher? Share your reflections in the comments. Not because I need your engagement, but because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to recognize their own transformation. If this video has served you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Not everyone is ready for this level of honesty about the transformational process. But for those who are, these ideas can be life-changing. They were for me. They've been for countless others who've studied Jung's work seriously. Subscribe to this channel if you want to continue exploring these depths together. I create content for people who are willing to do the real work, who understand that transformation is not about positive thinking or quick fixes, but about courageously facing everything you've been avoiding and integrating it into wholeness. Remember this. You are the evidence that consciousness can be forever altered by its encounter with its deepest truth. Your transformation, your integration, your hard-won wisdom. These are not just personal achievements. They're contributions to the evolution of human consciousness itself. Jung's legacy lives through you. Through every person who does this deep work, who faces their shadow, who integrates their wounds, who becomes more conscious, more authentic, more whole. This is the quiet revolution that changes everything, one transformed soul at a time. Your journey of conscious evolution has only just begun. And that beginning changes everything for you, for those around you, and for the collective consciousness we all share. Thank you for walking this path. Thank you for doing the work. Thank you for having the courage to pass through your soul's most painful test and emerge more essentially yourself. The world needs your transformed presence now more than ever. Then,